Hi, I'm Pastor Quintin, and Nick Baldetti from the Reno County KDHE serves as our officer here in
Health Department, yeah.
Health Department.
Yeah.
Has been guiding our community through this crisis. And Nick and Adam have been with several pastors a couple of times and tried to help us guide through it. And Nick, I just really appreciate you taking the time to come and maybe answer the same questions. Yeah. But maybe
Absolutely.
It'll help some of our folks. So I'm just going to kind of open it just a little bit by saying, maybe clarify to some of the questions we get, maybe clarify why this virus is different from the flu and why we're taking it a little more seriously.
Sure, yeah. So COVID-19 is a viral body of the coronavirus family. We've had coronaviruses for a while. We've known about the coronavirus type of viral body since the 1960s. The challenge with this one is it is a new virus, viral body that we have not seen before. So this being a novel body in part adds to some of the challenge. But in particular, what's challenging about this virus is kind of threefold. So again, one being that it's new, so we don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to react to our environment, our seasons, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, is that the impact that it has on individuals in terms of the stratification of our age brackets at this point is still very challenging in that we know it spreads very easily, we know it spreads very quickly, but the data still is holding that about 80% of those that contract COVID-19 are asymptomatic. That's in stark contrast to, say, our annual influenza season, where generally speaking, if someone catches influenza, we can qualitatively see that
you kind of know it.
You know you're getting sick, right? And so even if we're not necessarily tracking, even if we're not necessarily tracking quantitatively, we can visually see who's getting sick. We can see people. Whereas this is kind of a sneaky virus where some people may be very well infected and don't know it.
And just never realize it.
Yeah. And the other challenging aspect of this COVID-19 virus too is the way that it presents. If it does present symptomology, is that it just kind of acts like a upper respiratory cold. And so the challenge being that it presents with this tightness of chest, trouble breathing, coughing, upper respiratory issues. But the key marker right now seems to be running of a fever. 100, the threshold is a fever of 100.4.
Okay.
So 100, essentially we are kind of speaking to people about 100 degrees or more.
Okay.
Accompanied by some of these upper respiratory issues is indicative. Yeah, that would be indicative of COVID-19. But again, the challenge is we are in the throes of upper respiratory season, flu season. And so, you know, we've kind of got this perfect storm of it's cold season, it's flu season, and then we have a novel new virus that in some respects is extremely hard to track.
Okay.
And so that's what really makes this challenging. But it is important to, I think, illuminate that as we know it right now, still about 94% of individuals who contract COVID-19 are going to be just fine.
Okay. Okay.
But again, we don't know enough about the virus, and quite frankly, we don't have, as a nation, the saturation of testing capacity to truly know what our mortality rate is for this virus.
Sure.
We still hold that those individuals, particularly in the older age demographics, so 55 and up, who tend to have comorbidities or underlying health conditions, seem to be most at risk. There's some circumstances where younger than that are succumbing to this virus as well, and I'm not as fluent in terms of maybe the circumstances around each one, but we still hold true to those immunocompromised and old.
And has an age.
Yeah, and is in that higher age demographic. Those are the ones we're trying to protect.
Sure.
And
sounds like
so
we're
that's what's
as much
challenging.
on a learning curve as maybe just a monitoring
Absolutely,
curve, trying
yes.
to understand.
Yes.
So that sometimes I think folks are trying to isolate exactly what's happening, and we're just trying to learn. We're just in a process.
Yeah, it's the thing that we can do as both a medical and scientific community is to the best of our ability. When I talk about mortality rate, essentially that's known deaths
Right.
in the United States divided by known positive cases.
Right.
But we know that we have a very we don't have a very large inventory of testing across the United States, let alone in our state.
Right.
And really, to get an accurate depiction of that mortality rate is to control the denominator. And in order to control the denominator, we need to know what...
You have to have the testing to
exactly. So we're kind of stuck in this environment right now where, like you said, we're in a learning curve trying to digest what it is we're seeing as a nation with an incomplete picture. And that makes it really challenging. Yes.
So one of the questions I think we've heard is if someone calls in and there's no testing available, how worried about that should they be when they're told to go home and they didn't get a test? Is that something how would we address that?
Well, I think I'll answer that in two questions, Quintin.
Okay.
I think, so maybe from the personal standpoint, I don't necessarily believe that that is something that an individual should facilitate anxiety on behalf of the individual.
Okay.
And maybe take comfort in the fact that if your primary care physician is telling you to simply go home, rest, drink fluids, it is a viral body just like any other virus in that. I mean, again, maybe take comfort in the fact that the primary care physician is confident that you should be able to recover from this of your own volition at home.
Good.
Secondarily, speaking back to the incomplete picture from the medical side of things, that becomes a challenge, right? Because we're not necessarily tracking how many of those conversations happen of who present with the symptomology that is concurrent with COVID-19.
Right.
And therefore, we don't necessarily have a true depiction of saturation in terms of the spread in our community, in the state, and in the nation.
Okay.
So as an individual, I wouldn't concern myself terribly if you're simply told, stay at home and rest, drink fluids, recover. As an individual, it probably means that you're not high on a risk factor. It's not that you're being
you're not being dismissed by anybody.
You're not being dismissed by the medical field. It's that they believe that you're going to be okay. But on the converse side of that, from the epidemiological disease investigation standpoint, from the science side, that's extremely challenging.
Sure. Well, I think that's important because I think you made a statement to us one time that kind of two epidemics going on, the virus and then the panic in response to that.
Yes, absolutely.
And we still ought to be able to trust our medical professionals to guide us through this, that they're not. I think that's become a real, maybe one of the things is to help folks understand the social distancing, maybe clarify that a little bit. And I don't know that clarify, maybe just restate it again, why we're social distancing. And you kind of already answered that with these. It just helps us to stay apart from one another a little bit so that this spread can be controlled.
So what we know about the virus right now is that it is not airborne. It is spread through droplets, and there's a stark contrast. When we say spread through droplets, that means the micro droplets. If you cough, sneeze, etc. That's what expends the viral body from your body. It's not simply your breath. And that's the difference between airborne versus droplet spread.
So that's why sitting 5-6 feet apart
is important.
Is viable too.
So the 6 foot distance again is essentially, if you think about arm length and then an individual as well, were to spread out their arms. If you've touched fingertips to fingertips, that's essentially a fair amount of distance. And that's what we're asking is to maintain that 6 foot bubble from individuals. And then if for whatever reason you have to be within that 6 foot bubble, that you limit that exposure to 10 minutes.
To 10 minutes, right.
So
going to the grocery store, if you just are wise and don't stay long, you're okay.
And generally speaking, using your grocery store example, simply walking past someone in the grocery store in an aisle is an extremely low risk factor for contraction of the contagion. And so, and I think likewise with many of the social distancing guidelines that are put forth, in addition to, the stay-at-home orders, whether it's for Reno County or it's for other counties that are instituting similar orders. Again, it's not to necessarily lock you inside your home. That's
Right.
far from it, but instead it's to communicate the sense of severity and urgency that really you should limit your travel in and out of your home to essential only. So if you need to go to the store and buy groceries, get
Right.
supplies, what have you, nothing's restricting you from doing so. But it also, again, raises that sense of, look, if you don't need to be leaving your
It's
home,
awareness.
yeah, then please don't leave your home. But you're not going to be, you're not going to have PD knocking on your door when you walk
Good.
outside of your home.
Let's
You know.
clarify that again,
Yeah.
because some of the letters I get is, okay, so if I go to the store, if I go somewhere that's not really essential, do I have to have a letter? Am I going to get arrested? I think for some of my parishioners and others, I think maybe that's worth underscoring.
Yeah. So as I just stated, no, I mean, there's not, sheriff or PD staking out every street and
Right.
watching everybody's every movements. The aspect of kind of this letter that are being handed out to essential workers, or there is no letter, there is no requirement for a letter.
Not really necessary.
No, there should never be an instance where if you were to be stopped, which the likelihood of your being stopped by law enforcement just simply for traveling is very low.
Very low, okay.
But even in that respect, for whatever reason, you're not going to be required to have documentation to
Papers.
say that you
Right.
should be traveling.
And yet, maybe quickly to jump in there, if you don't need to be traveling, don't do it. I mean, that's really what we're saying is just for the sake of other people.
Yeah.
Even if you're not at high risk, what you're saying is for the sake of someone else.
Yes.
For our neighbors around. I don't know whether to ask this because I don't know whether to put you quite on the line. It seems like everybody's essential. So some folks have emailed me and asked me, well, Pastor, what do you think are essential? And, I think I understand when I read all the stuff on the websites, and maybe that's worth clarifying is
Yeah.
where they might go to get information. I mean, I'm aware of it, but maybe somebody doesn't know. There's all kinds of different websites you can go online. Reno County has a great one. Actually, the state of Kansas does too. I might want to clarify that. But I think maybe hearing you say what essential is might help us.
Yeah, so I think it's, first and foremost, I think it's important to maybe delineate what essential in the word of law
Okay.
is.
Okay. Good point.
And in the word of law, essential becomes it's a perceptionary term. So we do have to lean into definitions that are set forth by regulatory agencies and
Okay.
authorities. And so in terms of, as we recognize essential, for the state of Kansas, we lean into the authority of the governor.
Okay.
So our Governor Laura Kelly. And then there's a specific document that has been approved by the governor's office that, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's Kansas Emergency Functional, something to that effect.
I've seen it. We'll put it on the screen here so
Okay.
that people can find that.
Yeah, and essentially that lays out in specific order the type of subservices and then subsets of those specific services,
Correct.
those categories of services.
Yeah.
It lays out specific industries, and essentially the governor sets forth of what she allocates as essential to
For each of
non-essential.
those. Mhm.
Now, I know there certainly is a lot of discussion about what truly constitutes essential versus non-essential, and again, being a perceptionary term creates some confusion and disagreement in terms of what is essential and non-essential. And essentially, what transpires is that the ability of the local official to deem essential versus non-essential has to fall in line with the governor's authority.
Yeah.
And we can always tighten, but then we also walk a very tightrope with the Department of Labor as well in terms of labor laws.
Okay.
And so
It's complicated.
it is extremely complicated. That isn't to say that I think as this situation evolves in the environment that we're in right now, I would expect that, well, I wouldn't expect it to get less complicated,
Right.
but I would expect maybe some more
Clarification.
out of the state and governor's office as well.
Okay.
Because there are many conversations happening statewide
Okay.
in terms of the essential versus non-essential.
Sure. So as that, I think that's so important to hear in the sense that as we're kind of in the beginning stages, as I understand, of the next 2 or 3 weeks, there will be more clarification coming as we just stay attuned and listen to what you and others would help us to understand.
Yeah.
Not to get too concerned about that. Anything, Nick, if you were sitting where I'm sitting and asking questions, is there anything that you would ask yourself that you would clarify that maybe we don't know to ask?
Well, I think there's so many questions even that I have. And truthfully, that's the nature of kind of the time and the circumstance that we're living in.
Right.
And that we are kind of operating with half a playbook, it feels like. You know, off the top of my head, Quintin, I don't know necessarily what I would and would not ask.
Okay.
But I
Well, that's an unfair question, I suppose.
I think I think maybe versus instead of a question is maybe an advocacy plug is that there are no wrong questions.
Okay.
And it is well within the right of every constituent to ask said questions.
Okay.
And I guess me personally, to the best of my ability, I would offer the most transparent answers possible.
Yeah, you have.
To which to provide everyone this similar knowledge and playing field. So I think instead of a question, I would just say that don't be afraid to ask those questions, because I think it's very important to be honest and transparent in this time. I'd much rather people know the truth versus
So they can make their own informed decisions.
yeah, and I do feel there's an aspect of morality to what the situation as we see it as governmental officials
Right.
is versus trying to sugarcoat it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So
I really appreciate. In fact, I think we're very blessed in Reno County because you've done that. In fact, everything I've heard when I've listened to some calls, everyone in our government, in our city, in our county, in my opinion, is doing their very best to be transparent and open and share that. I got some real light questions.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
are just like stuff emailed into the church.
Okay.
And so drive-through restaurants, at this moment, they're still open? In foreseeable
yeah,
future?
so the order that will be in effect starting on Monday at 12:01 a.m. And even now, I mean, some restaurants have taken it on their own to institute this, but drive-through restaurants will still be open. In fact, even some sit-down restaurants will still be open, but only for carry-out and take-home orders.
Come in and order and go home.
Yeah. So there is no dine-in option.
Gotcha. That's a good
available
question, though,
now.
right?
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
This is a question I'm not even sure you're going to be able to answer, but I've had it sent to me. Maybe is there a moment out there, I've heard 2 or 3 weeks, where we might see that curve that we've all become so familiar with, that we might look for and we might breathe a little lighter? You may not be able to answer that question, but...
Yeah, I think, so again, using the playbook example, I don't know that the playbook is completely
we don't
filled
know
out.
Yet. Okay.
So in some respects, I might be making a extrapolation here, but I think we could potentially be seeing a dip into April, into May.
Okay.
I think that's probably going to be indicative of the natural migration of people from out or indoors to outdoors.
Sure.
What we don't know is the resiliency of this virus in terms of how it responds to heat.
Sure.
I won't say contradicting science. There's just different theories in terms of what we're going to see. And so we could see a dip into the summer months.
Okay.
And then we might see the fact that this viral body is indeed endemic, which would that would lead us to say that we might be seeing seasons like we do flu seasons.
Like anything else.
Yeah. There's also some models that suggest that the viral body may very well be extremely resilient to heat, and it's just going to stay steady.
Okay.
Which I think is some of the urgency and importance of the fact that the social distancing practices to try and flatten that curve, so to speak, so that our healthcare system is not overrun,
sure,
and that we can continue to serve everyone. So yeah, I don't know necessarily if that's an answer, but at least some information in terms of what we're seeing as a public health system.
I think that question came from, time frame, and I've heard you say the reason I went ahead and asked the questions is that we just don't really know.
Yeah.
We just gotta wait. And
Yeah.
The reason I ask that and want the audience to hear it is everybody wants a date out there, and I don't think we have one.
Right.
And so
I guess I would say I think federally some of the information is a hope that I think the quote is quote unquote we hope to pack churches by Easter.
Yeah.
And I would say strongly that is most likely not going to be the case.
Yeah. And that's, as you know, that's what we need to move a little more long-term in our spiritual gatherings and our plans. And I put out a video yesterday that disappoints us all, but we need to hear it, and we need to respond appropriately. So I appreciate that. I have a 93-year-old mother-in-law. She lives alone still. And we've taken certain precautions about going in and out. Anything you'd define for someone like that that's of age, particularly of that kind of age, and maybe recommendations for helping her?
Well, yeah, so your mother would certainly be in the high-risk category in terms of her age demographic, not knowing her. If there's any underlying health conditions, obviously that would exponentiate her risk factor. But generally speaking, she would be one that there would be a strong advocacy to stay at home as much as possible, herself. And then in terms of visitation, try to limit maybe visitation.
Right,
so whether it be simply maybe yourself or one designated person who may go check on her and do supply runs for her, things of that nature. But she would definitely be in that stratification that we really want to stay home.
Well, we've been taking groceries and just one of us going in and out, and I think that's so you got a child at home that wants to sleep over.
I think there's an aspect of parental judgment and prudence here, and hopefully it is certainly well within the authority of a parent to make an informed decision for their child. But I think there certainly needs to be due diligence in terms of, do you know the family? Well, hopefully as a parent,
the family, right?
The family,
hopefully we're already there.
But know the family. But I also think in this time it's well within your right and your responsibility as a parent to have the conversations with is that family taking seriously the recommendations in terms of stay at home? Are they limiting their travel? What's the traffic in and out in terms of that family? And then ultimately, it is, your authority as a parent to decide if that's appropriate for your child. That isn't to say that, if you feel comfortable, absolutely, there's an aspect, we are all human beings.
Sure.
And that's regardless of if it's a 5-year-old or it's a 95-year-old.
Right.
And so there is a aspect to being a human being that is centralized around the fact that we're social beings. And especially for our adolescents, that social interaction is extremely important.
Yeah.
And so we are not wishing to stymie that. But what we also don't want is 12 kids on a sleepover in a small basement room. You know, that is absolutely not what we're looking to do. But a 1 to 2 kid sleepover with the sureties in terms of exposure. I don't think that's inappropriate.
That's bad.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask questions that we run a child care, as you well know, and lots of confusion over why child cares are open, how child cares are mandated. If your child goes to a child care, then do you separate that child from grandparents? Those are the types of questions we get, and how long that might be going on. And we've struggled over that, and we're really pleased with the governor's statements about that helps us to make those decisions. But maybe helping a parent that has a child in child care because they are an essential worker, and just maybe address that a little bit.
Yeah, so the governor, the President of the United States on down the line, so governor and then local is designated, designated child care, daycare centers, and in-home child care as a vital infrastructure, which essentially means that they are vital in that those essential healthcare workers removing the barrier of child care to ensure that they can fulfill those essential duties. And so that's really kind of the realm for which daycare centers and childcare, in-home childcare providers operate. That said, and per the guidelines that you just referred to, there's guidelines in terms of also working with local licensed childcare providers and the institutions that champion that program at the local level, of working through proper social distancing guidelines, separations, like for a large daycare center, much like Abundant Life has, is ensuring separation in terms of those class or groupings to 10, separating into different rooms, not intermingling and cross categories, or pollinating is the only word I can think of right now.
I agree.
Within the system. So taking care in terms of the facility to adhere to some of those social distancing guidelines that we're talking to. Obviously, they're kids, and what the science tells us right now is that kids are not nearly as severely affected by the COVID-19 virus as is, again, our older, aging and individuals with underlying health conditions or immunocompromised. So I think it's important to note that the fear of COVID-19 spreading in terms of a daycare center is not centralized on the health of the child. I think that's very important. Okay. But that speaks to now, I think, our workers, so our actual providers, and then the families. You spoke of, like the grandparents and things.
Use wisdom there.
Right. So absolutely, I think, and this maybe filters a little bit back into the conversation about the sleepover, in that as a parent, so presumably as a son or daughter of your mother and father, the distancing guidelines in terms of your children interacting with your elderly parents, their grandparents, we need to use some real caution and discretion there, in terms of, we absolutely don't want to separate and or siphon those relationships. Those relationships are extremely important for the mental health both of the child and of the grandparent. But at the same time, it becomes rather difficult. And I know some families are put into difficult situations where the grandparents might actually be the providers for kids. And so, I think, to the best of our ability as individuals and as a society, we're just going to have to work with each one of our circumstances individually. Right. But just know that, our kids don't have the same mental acuity and ability and comprehensive factors that we do as adults. And so as adults, we do need to maintain some of that guidance
Sure.
For our kids. And so as an individual, each one of us, we have a responsibility to make the best choices possible
For that child.
for not only ourselves, but for that child.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's an aspect of accountability. I mean, and every parent, this should resonate with them in that, hey, look, I'm responsible for myself, but I'm also responsible for the life of my child.
Yeah.
I don't say life to
For the health.
assume, but yeah, like the health. So again, children are a very low, at this time, a low risk category. But I mean, I think what I'm very long-windedly saying is that each individual's circumstance is going to be different.
Okay.
And so we can't necessarily wait for a blanket order,
Right.
if you will,
Right.
from the governmental entity to tell us what we should and should not be doing. And I think for every circumstance, there's going to be certain areas where we're going to have to exercise our own judgment.
Sure.
And I think under the umbrella of the guidance set forth, if you're making the best informed decisions and judgments you can, conducive to those guidelines,
Right.
then no one's going to fault you for that.
Right. I heard you make a statement in a meeting the other day that I just resonated with me, and that was that this is a time for each one of us to accept our responsibility to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And I took by that, Nick, that you and our officials, government health officials, were giving us as much information as we could, as you could, but that each one of us, whatever our level of responsibility is, that we're going to have to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was very important to hear, and I think that's true as a dad, that's true as a pastor, that's true as the chief of police, whatever your leadership role is. And I hear you saying the same thing. As a parent, you're going to have to lead, and there's probably no one going to show up and tell you exactly what to do.
Right.
But you're going to have to assimilate and make yourself available to the information as best you can.
Yeah.
And I thought that's what I heard you saying, and I really think that is what I hear you saying again.
Yeah, I would agree completely in that each one of us, regardless of our status, our stature, we have a responsibility to lead, not only lead ourselves, but those that we have influence over.
Right.
Right, and the aspect of modeling is just as important as the aspect of word.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I stand by that statement that this is the opportunity for each one of us individually to move into that leadership role of our own lives and the lives of those that we essentially are accountable for.
Just kind of, if someone works on the front lines, if they, is there anything we can do to help them? If we know of someone that are in that, is there something we can do as neighbors to help those folks that must be out and must get out? You have any thoughts there as to what we could do to help those group of people?
Well, I think first and foremost, one of the things we can do as community members, as neighbors, as friends, is to offer support.
Okay.
Both whether that's physical support in terms of what have you, offering a dinner or what have you, something like that.
Great idea.
But the other is just emotional and mental support in that, understanding that, people are still going to be working in this unprecedented time.
Right.
Not just for us, but as a nation. But I think what's most important, and I would really advocate to the audience is, again, this aspect of it is unprecedented, and many people are fearful of the unknown, and quite frankly, we are moving into an unknown time.
Sure.
But the best thing that we can do is exercise patience and grace with our family, our friends, our neighbors, and our loved ones.
Right.
In that we're all technically in the same boat. And so, to the best of our ability, offering support to one another and leaning into love and not hate.
Yep.
is extremely important in this day and age. And I think if we can break down aspects of divisiveness,
Right.
And come together, that's going to be extremely important, because myself, state leaders, national leaders, we don't quite know exactly where this is going
Right.
yet. So,
Right. Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's been on our hearts that this really is a time to work together and not be divided by idealisms or views, but to believe everybody's doing their best they can. And so that I really appreciate those words, because I really do think that's what we've been encouraging folks to do, is to do everything you can to support each other. And that if you can comply with some of these social distancings or stay at home, if you comply with it, that really is beneficial for the entire community, as well as, you're right, these unprecedented times that they're just facing all of us at this time. Nick, I just really appreciate it. Trying to think if there's any other questions I need to do. Maybe in closing, I'll make some statements to somebody that might be listening. I just really want to encourage anybody that's tuned in, that's watching this, that we stay real connected to our social groups, and we have so many different opportunities and ways of doing that. But call a friend, stay focused about our health, stay focused about our community, stay in faith, stay diligent in these moments. And then just a couple things as pastor. If you know someone struggling with addiction or mental health issues or those kinds of things, I know there's places in our community where they can get help. That help has not been shut down. And so we're going to put some stuff on the bottom of the screen. I think that during this time, some of those issues that we give care to are important to realize they're still going on. They haven't been stopped.
Right.
And if you want to connect on a spiritual level, I know the Hutchinson News, VOAD, Lisa Gleason, they've published all of those, and again, we'll put them on the bottom of the screen. Reach out to someone. Just because we're not gathering together doesn't mean that we're apart. And I know many of the pastors in town are doing their best to broadcast their services, to reach out, touch, provide support. The chaplains at the hospitals and the homes where our elderly are cared for, they're there. So get on Facebook, reach out, connect, and if you know someone, you reach out to them. Each of these churches and each of our faith centers are just doing their best. And though our doors might be closed now, our hearts are open. We're all looking for ways to support each other in this time. So if you look around, you'll find it. So several of my friends the other day said, stay on track. Keep track of what's going on. There's ways to tune in, and there's ways to stay together. And as the scriptures say, this will pass, and together we will get through this, and there will be a return to some sort of reality that we all appreciate as this country, as our community, as our faith exercises. So again, Nick, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, Adam.
Absolutely.
It's made me really appreciate that all of a sudden we've gone from a global awareness to a local awareness, and that we have to take a local responsibility in these times. So thank you so very much.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Blessings.